All right, so step one, we're going to take the 8, we're going to put it on the other side. You do get 0 when you do that. Okay, so that's okay if you get 0.
You just take X out.
You could, but no, because we're practicing completing the square techniques.
No.
But yes, you could factor out an X and then solve, and it'd be way faster. So when you get a question that says solve using a method of your choice, that is your method of choice. But no, we need to skip this term because there's no number in front of x squared. Take half of b, which is
1.
square it,
1.
and add that to both sides.
Wow.
Okay. Then we are going to factor x squared plus 2x plus 1 and write it as a binomial squared, which is going to be
X plus 1.
Yep. Okay. It's always x and then whatever half of b is. So we said half of b was 1, so x plus 1. Then you will square root both sides and you will not forget
Plus or minus?
plus or minus.
Exclamation point.
Okay. And so then whatever's left, you have to solve that. So just split it up.
The band is amazing, so.
You know, it's so amazing that it distracted me. So here you subtract 1, you get 0.
Yay.
Here you subtract 1, you get -2. Earlier, if this is what you have, completing the square is like not the easiest way. The easiest way is to just take this out. And then 0, 2, done. So you can see that you can solve using different techniques. Some ways take longer, some ways don't. Ultimately, you're going to need to know how to complete the square for certain questions because factoring isn't always going to work. For C,
Subtract 10x.
subtract 10x to put it on the left,
And there's 0.
and then subtract 12 to put it on the right. So you have to move a couple of things instead of just, instead of just one. Remember to leave a placeholder. Whoops. Okay, so leave a placeholder so that you can complete the square. Okay, do we need step 2? Do we have to divide by anything?
No.
No, there's nothing in front of x squared, so we don't need to divide by anything. Okay, so then we're going to go to step 3. We're going to take half of b, which is,
-5.
and then we're going to square it.
25.
Yeah. And what do we do with that?
Put it in
Add
the
them on
blank.
both sides.
You put it in the blank, and you also put it on the other side because it's an equation and you have to maintain equality, equalness.
Anthem?
Okay, over there, you get 13, which is not a perfect square root. That's okay. Over here, we did this one earlier, so we know it's x minus 5.
That is a demonic 13.
Yes. So unfortunately, 13 is not a perfect square,
Not 13.
which means that we wouldn't have been able to solve this by factoring. We would have needed either the completing the square technique or the quadratic formula. Some people like quadratic formula better just because it's a formula and you can kind of do it without thinking, but it takes like twice as long if you're going through and simplifying and the numbers are really big, so it's not always the best method, but it will always work. So when it's not a perfect square, you want to see if you can simplify it, and if you can't, you're just going to leave it in a square root. If it was like a 12, the square root of 12 can be simplified, meaning it can be broken down into prime factors and rewritten as something else. So for example, 12 breaks down, we have 2 2s and a 3 that doesn't have any partner. So you could rewrite this as 2 square root 3. So the 2 2s come out, couples come out, leftovers stay in.
Yeah, that's all me.
Okay. So another example.
I guess I'm staying forever.
So like 128, bigger number.
Oh,
What goes
yeah.
into 128?
4.
9.
Okay, 4 and
Too low.
I chose a wrong. Just do
332.
okay, what goes into 32?
8.
84.
What goes into 4?
2.
2.
goes into 8.
2,
Four.
4,
And 4?
2.
3.
Okay, once you're all the way down to the primes, you can't go any farther. You're gonna go
Square
in.
root 2.
2. Yep.
What he
Square root
said.
2.
No, it's not that. He's wrong.
2 to the
No, it's
7.
not. It's not what you said.
2 to the 7.
So you have 3 groups of 2s, and yes, you have a leftover 2. The leftover 2 stays inside by himself.
Wait. Yeah.
The 3 groups of 2
8 multiply.
6.
get multiplied,
Ah, nice.
Oh, 8.
It's 2 cubed.
and so you get 8 root 2.
I'm sorry.
You can just take a 6 and 4 out.
I regret nothing.
The reason for this is because the square root of 128 is like 64 and 2. And 64 square rooted is 8, then you got the 2, and you know,
You just kind of can't do it.
that's irrational, so you just leave it. Alright, so these are just a few examples of how you would simplify radicals if you need to. If you don't need to, if it's 13, you just leave it like that. So like 13, 15, 10, like none of those can be simplified. Because they're either prime or they don't have like 2 of the same kind of thing. So that means that to solve, just add your 5 over and you can be done. If you want to split it up into 2 different things, you can. But you don't have to, unless MathXL tells you to. But I do think there's a plus or minus button in MathXL too.
You have to have D on it.
So for D, step 1, do we have to move any constants?
No.
No. Step 2, do we have to divide by
Yes.
A?
No.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
You do. There is a 2 in front of x squared. We don't want it there, so we're going to divide
That one.
each term by 2.
By 2.
Timber! Okay, I'm going to leave a space so that I can complete the square.
No.
Oh no. This is no bueno.
If you take
Okay.
that.
My line.
You're going to take half of B,
1.
which is a half, technically, negative.
Would it be negative 1? Yeah.
Then you're going to square it,
Which is.
and you get
2.
a 4th.
Oh no.
And add that to both sides.
Oh yeah.
That's not good.
That's
I
no
was talking
bueno.
about the right side.
Fractions are friends.
Not food.
That's no
Wait,
bueno.
but if you. Oh.
When you do that, and then it's
Okay.
negative 8.
I get it now.
So then the
7 over
binomial squared is going to be x minus 1/2.
Ah.
And then over here, you have to know how to add some fractions.
Multiply 4.
Okay, find a common denominator.
Negative
8.
2/4.
No, negative 5/4.
It's
Negative
7.
7/4.
Yeah, it's
Negative 1
7.
and 3.
I didn't try.
Negative 1 3/4. Can you square root that?
Of course you can. It's a number.
Exactly. So you want to use improper fractions.
You can't square root that either.
Yeah, you can. Watch.
Denominator.
It's gonna be negative. It's
So-
square root
Yeah.
7/4 I.
Bet.
So the square root of the denominator is 2. Okay, so you're going to start with that. Plus or minus. The square root of the numerator is not square rootable. Since it's negative,
It's
I.
I.
you need the imaginary unit.
Yay.
If this confuses you, watch the 4.8 video again.
That's the
Watch the
answer?
video that I watched third period.
No, then you have to add the 1/2.
I was joshing you, Mr. Red.
So
You could multiply by
1/2
the
plus or minus the square root of 7/2 I. That's your answer. It's not a pretty answer, but it's an answer. And it's an answer that you wouldn't be able to find by factoring. You would either have to complete the square or use the quadratic.
Can't wait to type that one into MathXL.
Since this is a minus sign, we're using the difference of cubes technique. This is going to factor to a linear factor, aka a factor where x to the 1 is the biggest exponent, and then a quadratic factor. Okay, so you have 2 factors. The linear factor is going to be really easy to solve. The quadratic factor, you'll have to solve using either completing the squares technique or quadratic formula. Typically, it's easier to complete the square unless b is odd, and then maybe you don't want to. So after you factor, take these 2 factors and set them equal to 0. Okay, and then you're treating them as like separate questions. Solve this, solve this. Okay, so this, super easy. What do you get?
It's 64.
2. This is your 1 real solution, which means if you were to graph this on a graphing calculator, that would be the only zero that you could see with your eyes. The solutions to this aren't real, and therefore you wouldn't see them as zeros on a graph. However, they are solutions, so we need them. They're just going to be imaginary. Okay, so I'm telling you, they're going to be imaginary, so you can anticipate imaginary solutions. So, I'm going to complete the square, because that's what we're focusing on today. So I have to subtract 4. Then we're going to take half of b, which is,
1 half.
no, wait, 1, and then
One.
square it, and you get,
1.
1.
so add that to both sides.
Yay. I
Negative
second guessed
3.
myself. This hurts my head.
Okay, factor this.
So
Or
x
that.
plus 1 squared.
Yep, x plus 1 squared. This is just negative 3. Okay, so you can see now we're going to square root both sides. You see how it's negative. This is where the imaginary solutions come in. So square root this and this. Is there a square root of 3?
No, it's
No.
imaginary.
So you're just going to write plus or minus the square root of 3
I.
or you could put I root 3. Math Excel wants you to put the I behind the number.
That's dumb.
So I'm going to just
Nobody likes
stay
Math
consistent
Excel.
with Math Excel so it's not confusing. Then you just subtract 1. If you want to split it up into 2, you can.
Let's just
You
say
don't
it's
have
equal
to, but if you want to, it looks like this.
Do we have to?
She just said.
If you want to, I don't know